Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many of you actually here. So I think we had 35, 40 that registered, and we have around 30, 25 here. So it's good turnaround actually. And that's our first in-person guest seminar organized by the Digital Trust and Security team. So it's great to see you all. Okay, I've taken a few notes. They include housekeeping notes, some information about who's organizing this seminar, and then finally, and most importantly, some information about Wendy and her colleague here, actually, Claire. Was it Claire?
Claire, yes.
Claire. I don't have your bio, but Claire comes with Wendy. Okay. So this seminar is organized by the Center for Digital Trust and Society. Yeah, and that center was formed or launched officially, I think, last year, yeah, by Emma, who is there. She's not running the center anymore. The center is run by Nick Lord, yeah, who will be joining us a bit later on. Yeah, and the center has 6 research teams. One of them is the Workplace and Security Cluster, which is kind of, I'm the lead of that, and that seminar is essentially organized via that theme. Yeah? And that cluster is actually part of a much bigger movement in the University of Manchester, which is called the Digital Futures Community. And I found out it has around 2,000 members right now. It started off with just above 1,000 members, but now we're close to 2,000 members, it seems. 2,000 members across the University of Manchester that are working on opportunities and challenges that arise due to the digital revolution. And so it's not only us guys doing cybersecurity, but we have people in Industry 4.0, we have people in physics, we have people in humanities, and so on, working on opportunities and challenges and around digitalization. Okay, I'm Richard Darmeninger, for the ones who don't know me. I work here in this building, I'm an academic, and I'm leading one of the clusters of the Center for Digital Trust and Society. As I mentioned before, there are 6 of these clusters. I think we have a few of the leads here who will be joining us later on. Important to mention, this seminar is co-organized also by the FinTech group at AMBS, which is led actually by Marcus. And he just told me there are 7 people of his group here, which is great. So thank you very much, Marcus and the group, for supporting us. So the purpose of these guest seminars is to get experts from around the world to talk about cutting edge in digital trust and society. And there I'm delighted to welcome our guest speaker, Wendy Jephson. Yeah. You have seen her bio on the announcement. I will try to summarize it very quickly, but look at her bio for more details. Look at her LinkedIn profile. I think you have a LinkedIn profile. Okay, she's a CEO and co-founder of LetsThink, which is a new startup company, and Claire is part of it. I found out there are 9 members in that company, which is great. Yeah, and the work that company is doing there, they're developing domain-specific technologies, yeah, to address or to support complex, critical, or analytical thinking. Yeah, so this is very similar to the work that Wendy did when she was head of research at Nasdaq. We spent actually quite a long time. Yeah? So you have done really good work there, and she was working there with a multidisciplinary team of experts on essentially designing technology to solve some of the big issues in financial services. And financial services, as I understand, is one of the areas LetsThink is looking at as well, but so is music. How cool is that? She won't be talking about music today, but music is one of the areas she's working on. You can talk with her about music later on, yeah, because we have that room until 2:45, yeah? So stick around, have some food, and continue your discussion. There will be a fire alarm, a test fire alarm, 1:20. Yeah, that will be a fire alarm that maybe will go 5 to 10 seconds. So stay calm, yeah. But if there's a fire alarm at any other time than 1:20, that's a real fire alarm, and the staff here will then guide you out of the room. Yeah, so don't worry about that. Okay, Wendy is a well-recognized speaker, as you might have guessed. She has given keynotes to regulations, universities, organizations, and so on. And she has been on the board of several Nasdaq exchanges, yeah? Nasdaq exchanges, that's what they're called. And it looks like you're an advisory to UCL, yeah? Are you still doing that role?
Yeah.
Very good. Maybe you should become an advisor at the University of Manchester. Yeah. So, and her title today, the title of her talk is Designing Technology to Engage the World's Thinking. Yeah? So that's quite exciting topic and current and cutting edge, and she will be drawing on her experience to discuss things such as automation bias, the role of people, autonomy, and so on, yeah, in this era that is dominated by technological advancements. So her presentation will be around 40 minutes, 35 minutes, and there will be a Q&A session afterwards. And on this note, I'm passing on to you, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really lovely to be in the room again. It's slightly terrifying again because I've done this for a few years now, funnily enough. And so thank you very much for coming. Designing technology to engage the world's thinking. And we really believe that people are brilliant and can be even more brilliant if we design technology in a way that really supports and works with the way we want to work. And that's a core goal. But thinking today, I was trying to figure out where to start and what to tell you about. And I've had a number of different roles, as you've already heard. Chief Behavioural Scientist was in the first startup, Sybenetix, and at a time 10 plus years ago when not many people had that title, if any. So I had an awful lot of time with people asking me what it is I do, and particularly in financial services. There's a growing number of behavioural scientists now, but it's still actually not that well known as a discipline. And so I'm going to talk, a lot of the talk is from the perspective of the behavioural science approach to designing technology. But I've been in financial services now for a while, and RegTech is the category I've spent most of my time in. RegTech and supervisory tech is the largest category you can see there because it's regulating all of the different segments and players that within the financial services system. And it very much is a system. They're all interrelated in some shape or form with the services that they're providing and lots of commonalities. I've spent most of the time in capital markets, which is where companies are raising capital and people are evaluating those companies in order to trade the shares for those particular companies. So working in the investment management industry in the asset management world, and then particularly with Nasdaq on the dealing and broking side of things, where they're working with the banks that are providing research on companies and facilitating the trades that go on every minute of the day around the world. So that's the area that I've been in the most with technology. And actually within that, I've been in a product management function. So building technology turns out to be extraordinarily hard work and complicated and requires a huge number of skills, which is why there's 9 people already in LetsThink, because you need a lot of different skill sets. But within Nasdaq, you can see the grey, there's lots of different support functions that you need in order to deliver great technology. And product management sits really at the heart of that. They're developing the products. Product management itself is split again into different kind of specialists, including research and ideation, which is what I headed up. And that's an interdisciplinary activity as well, where we had behavioural scientists, data scientists, and computer scientists working very closely together to look at the problems we're trying to solve and the technology we're going to design for it. So that's just to give you a little context of really kind of the way we had to work, we were working together in Nasdaq and within an organisation, what you have to bring together to successfully get products into the world. And actually, I very much speak from the practitioner's point of view. You're the academics, I'm not the academic. So although I draw very heavily on what's in the scientific literature and try to apply it as best I can, along with the team, it's very much been a collaboration with academics as we go along, as well as trying to embed that scientific method in the work that we've done. And the environment that we're in, I kind of liken to the product Grand Prix, because the products that are out there, and some of them have been around there for decades, are going around the track, and the clients are driving them hard and fast, and they're constantly needed to be fixed. And then beta products are coming along on the outside and trying to slot into that system. And this is an enormous system of technology. Although FinTech appeared almost as a funky category 10 plus years ago, Nasdaq will tell you that they were the first ever FinTech 50 years ago when they developed their first electronic exchange for audits. And the alpha is another track, which is where the research and ideation happens, where you're developing new products. But again, you have to be aware of what's going on already out in the environment that you're trying to swap into. Interoperability is probably the biggest challenge in this environment because there is an enormous amount of technology already, and you're trying to fit in with legacy and new technology and get it adopted in a way that people can actually use it. So that's just a little bit of the environment that I've worked in and what.
That's it. That's the one.
That's So now I'm going to kind of give you an introduction I give to other people about behavioural science, just to give them an introduction. You'll know more about it. But I kind of like to start with this and say, you know, there's something these two pictures have in common, and it's not Tom Cruise. It's the fact that behavioural science methods are used to design technology that is involved with high-risk activities such as flying plane or computerized equipment. And it really matters in those environments because it's life or death, as we know from stories in the news. So it's actually been used a lot in many industries before, but not so much in financial services, as I mentioned, and actually not so much in FinTech, which has been going at pace, and it's a competitive environment without the regulatory scrutiny in the same way as there is for medical devices or planes, which means that people sit in their own silos and have a go. I used to get asked a lot when I say I'm chief behavioural scientist, does that mean you know what I think? So I like to do this. Let's see. Pick a card, focus on that card. Okay, I've taken one away. Now what I want you to do is put your hand up if I've correctly known what you were thinking and taken your card away. Okay, so you should all have put your hand up because it's a different set of cards. And the ones that you will have noticed, some of you will have noticed that actually this is about situational awareness. It's about knowing how people think. The fact that magic works is because you direct attention means that somebody's focusing on one card, they're not necessarily focusing on all the other cards. They don't notice that you've changed the whole pack. So of course, everyone's card is gone. So behavioural scientists is about knowing how people think and not what they think. And how they think, of course, we think with our brains. And some people would say we think with our hearts, and actually that's also true because your emotional centre, the limbic region, is in the centre of your brain. And that's very much involved with how you value things, whether things are important to you as you learn things. And that has projections to the frontal cortex, where we think more rationally, or we believe we think more rationally. And it interacts with understanding what's going on in the environment. And when things matter to you and you understand why, then there are projections up to the motor cortex, the pink, green and yellow part, which is about action. That has connections to our body, and therefore we go and do things. So at Sybenetix, which was the first startup I was in, what we wanted to do was understand and improve human decision making. We really wanted to leverage behavioural science to understand how people were thinking in the workplace, and therefore design a technology that could support them. So our world, and what we started with, was fund managers. So fund managers we kind of see as the Formula One of decision makers in financial services, and their job is to take money and turn it into large piles of money. And they do it by looking at screens like this, taking in huge amounts of information. And the interesting thing about this picture really is not the screens, it's the person sat in front of it. Because when you look at it from their perspective, their job is to think. Their job is to solve the jigsaw problem, which is to look through their screen at multiple pieces of information that are constantly changing, coming from many disparate data sets, and figure out what's going on in order to make a decision. So when we thought about designing technology that might be able to support them in that role, then you could start off by saying, well, tell me about your job. So what you get if you do that is one of their glossy slides, brochures where they tell you what their disciplined process is. And it typically looks like this in pretty much any asset manager. that it's all a very smooth, disciplined process where they're narrowing down 3,000 opportunities in their universe of companies to invest in, down to a neat little portfolio. We didn't think it was going to be quite that neat. And what we did is we went into asset management and we used critical decision method and FRAM, which is functional resonance analysis method by Eric Holnagel, to really capture the tasks that these fund managers were doing when they did them and the information they were taking in. And it looks a bit more like this, and this is only a partial map of what they're doing. And the bit at the end there is decisions to buy or sell, and the other inputs into that are other activities and information they're taking into account as they make a decision to buy or sell. So this one particular task up there, which is size of position, how much money to put into a particular investment, you can begin to see the different levels of input. So there's fundamental analysis, the macroeconomic cycle, geopolitical event, volatility, liquidity, etc., etc. You can imagine what they're doing right now with everything that's going on in the world. There's an awful lot of inputs to go in to decide, I've got the right amount in this, should I be in it? When do I come out? When do I get back in? So there's a huge amount of complexity in one investment. And this is the technology we designed to support performance. So that is a screen of one investment. The red bars there are the sell trades that this person was making, and blue bars are when they bought in. And the shaded area is their exposure to the prices in the market as the prices were moving. And you can see a number of different metrics. But this is one position, one investment they're invested in. But they don't only have one at any one time. They have 40 or 50, or they might have 100 or to 120 in their portfolio. So the question then is, well, if we know that human brains have finite processing capacity, which of course we do, how are they dealing with all of this information? How are they managing that portfolio? So if you think about it with that, typically, system one, system two, it's obviously a bit more complex than that, but investments that matter to you, you're starting to engage your cortex, and you will look at the ones that are hurting you, that you're losing money on, that your clients are calling you up and your manager's giving you hassle about. Now that same system actually will, when things aren't hurting you in the same way, when things are, will also decide to throw it out and not pay attention to it. And that, I call that the bin of justification of potential alpha. And I call it that because what they would say is, well, I looked at that one quite recently. It was doing all right. I don't need to think about that one for the time being. I haven't had it for very long. I did the work recently. So there's always a reason why they weren't looking at it. But the problem with that is they're paid to look after every investment in their portfolio. And these are known as passengers in a portfolio. Now that's not making good use of the money. So we designed tailored alerts to improve their situational awareness of these passengers in their portfolios. They weren't necessarily losing money, but we found that they were underperforming comparatively over time. So it was about enabling people just to be aware that perhaps they weren't paying attention to it. Perhaps they could send their research analyst off to go and have a look because they hadn't touched it for a while. And typically it's when they started trading a lot more in their portfolio generally to try and sort out what was going on. So a situation like now. We also provided for them in-depth analysis for them to do away from that kind of pressurized moment. Things like looking at how they went into their portfolios. So that bit in the middle, you can see the blue bars rising up. That's them stepping into a position. So buying shares over about a week or so. And you can just about see there's a green bar. What we could show is that if they'd got that position in one go, they would have made more money by doing it and having the courage of their convictions. But quite often they like to test the water and they can't quite go for it. So this is feedback to show them how often they were leaving money on the table by stepping in and enabling them to reflect on that. It's never to tell them what to do. That's absolutely their job. But it's to give them a bit more feedback on the way that they were trading, which they couldn't see in any other way. What that allowed us to do was to develop things like a behavioural fingerprint of the key point factors that matter to them they take into account. Like, so this is a spider diagram with their median in green, and holding period is how long you've held an investment for, exposure is how much capital you typically put into it, how big you like to go, Your sector experience will take it, if you've not traded something in a particular sector before, you're more likely to trade in a small way to learn about it. They call them test the water trades. So that also tells you what you might expect somebody to put in terms of capital on a particular sector. Trading activity and portfolio composition across the portfolio. It's their activity and the numbers within a portfolio. Now, this kind of information then is super useful if you're looking at it from the compliance side of things, which was the other product we were asked to then design and build for Man Group, which is Europe's largest publicly traded hedge fund. And for that, we developed this tool Compass, which is using the same data, but looking at it from that compliance perspective to see whether or not people are doing things they shouldn't be doing. So again, what we have here is you can see them stepping into a trade, into a position, and you can see 2 red dots, which are firing alerts for potential insider dealing. You can see a big price jump there. So they've traded ahead of a big price jump, which is going to trigger an alert. Did this person know something, have inside information that they shouldn't have traded on? And what we also did then was spend time with the compliance officers doing similar things like CTA and CDM to understand what factors did they take into account, the experienced ones, when they're assessing whether or not something is suspicious. And that enabled us to develop a heat score. So proximity to the event, so the bit in red up there, there's the first thing they're looking at, how close to this trading was it? Because the markets are constantly changing. If you've got inside information, you're going to try and use it as close to it as you possibly can, because if you use it too early, you risk the market moving against you in any event. So, but what we also see, the green part is how much liquidity they've consumed. So if they wanted to, they had inside information, they wanted to go for it, they might have bought up a lot of the stock to take advantage of that. They haven't particularly compared to their typical way of trading. And the yellow part is how much they've changed their position. And again, that wasn't a big change in this particular instance. So the compliance officer already has more information about this person than he could typically have had before, just even from having the alerting information, which, by the way, is the rules-based approach to looking for any kind of market abuse in the industry right now. It's the pattern of trading around market price moves. You then add that to this particular fingerprint where we see that everything's in normal range except for the trading activity is high across and the whole portfolio composition seems to have gone down low. So this fund manager has been trading a lot and changing their portfolio a great deal. Now, when you expand out by bringing in, because we brought in the history of their trading over time, what you see is actually this particular fund manager has had this particular stock, this investment in the past, and they've held it for a certain amount of time. They've closed it out just before a big price drop, and then they've gone back in again. Now that price drop was actually Brexit. So that you can begin to create a story now that this is perhaps somebody who knew this stock very well. They knew there was a potentially price moving event coming up of the Brexit vote. They've been working carefully in order to adjust their portfolio to cope with this potential shock that was coming up. And then as we bring in more information, we see that there was a scheduled news announcement of the results for this particular company. It's a known event. So they've traded in a way to avoid the price shock, and they know that there's some news coming out that's going to be well known, and they expect it to be good. That's not inside information. And they've opened back up and they've gone back into their position. And that's what triggered the alert. But now the compliance officer reading this story can go and ask better questions of the fund manager themselves, but also can just put together a decent explanation of why somebody has traded in that way. And remember, compliance officers in asset management firms, they have 2 hats on. They're trying to obviously keep an eye out for bad behaviour, but they're also going to defend their people. So if they can defend them, because by using a good explanation of what they're doing, and of course people are paid to make money, then they're going to, they want tools to help them defend it against things that on the face of them look suspicious. So as we were going along, we really felt that things like this, just bringing in a trading heat score, which you wouldn't believe the amount of technology out there that just provides an alert list. And what you then get is, well, how do I prioritize this enormous work list in my day? Well, this allows you to then start to bring in some kind of distribution of what's risky and what do I need to pay attention to with my people. And what we've, there's a huge amount there that if you start to bring in this information and in the way that a compliance officer would analyse it, and you report that in a digitised report, then you can start to have some, what we were thinking then was robo-compliance, which leaves the human to look at the high risk cases and apply their expertise at that particular end of things. What we also noticed was, going back again to our analysis, there's information there. I told you that that was Brexit, and you all know what that meant and why that might have an impact in the market, the Brexit vote. But there's nothing on the screen to tell you that that's what it was, and you have to remember that that particular date was the Brexit vote. So this is, again, understanding what people think about when they're analysing this, and thinking about alternative data sets that you could generate, knowing that people are looking at macroeconomic cycles and geopolitical events. You can create a data set that might be able to plug into the system to, again, continually provide more information to compliance officers. So this is the point at which we got to where Nasdaq decided that although they'd had a go at designing a buy-side compliance tool without behavioural scientists, I would say, they realised that we were better than them and bought us. So that's the beauty of behavioural science in adding to that. So that was the end of that particular chapter, and it moved on into Nasdaq. So there, they had a new vision. They have a vision of reimagining markets to realise the potential of tomorrow. So you start off by thinking, what does that mean? And markets. So markets obviously are people and companies, which are made of people. So again, behavioural science, in my mind, is extremely useful in understanding markets. And then what does this reimagining mean? Well, when I think about that, this is about supporting people to think differently if they're going to do things differently. So again, if you understand how people work and how the brain works, then you can start to think about, okay, so I need to provide information that allows both fast insight and the ability to play. I've got to be able to play with this information. So you've got to find it in the first place, and getting data into systems is no small task in financial services. There's enormous businesses built off just that side of things. But if you find the information, you've got to be able to add to it, and then you take things away from it to see what emerges. So let's eat Grandad is quite a different prospect to let's eat Grandad. So our technology, we really felt, gave you the fast insight, your ability to play because you could navigate around it. And then the collaborative intelligence is the human in the loop in this instance. Because the story that I told you about the investment in this particular case, when I look at the data set across this is the path that I took in order to tell you my story. So this led us to a new way of thinking, can we design a technology that will, one, support this in a better way, because an awful lot of the technology is very static in the sense of it takes you from A to B, and you follow workflow, and everyone wanted to design workflow, not necessarily supporting thought flow. And thought flow goes backwards and forwards and figures things out and wants to take something away that they thought was relevant earlier and actually find out that it's not, and you add something else to it. So this took us into a new project where we were really looking at investigation of these kind of complex cases and how could we support that in a better way. And this really was the evolution of understanding what that problem was, because the first thing we were asked was, could we integrate trade and e-coms alerts together? And the other thing in financial services is, you have lots of different data sets. You have trade data, you have e-coms, e-communications data like emails and chat. They're very different, as you all know. You need different technologies, different skill sets to understand them. Different companies have been built up to develop those. Different types of compliance officers deal with them. So what you have is a whole load of silos and a whole load of information that really, if you put it all together, would probably be quite powerful, but nobody knew how to do that. So the question was, can we integrate trade and e-coms alerts? But actually, when we spent time, again, interviewing compliance officers about what they were actually doing when they were investigating cases and working with this data, what we found was what their problem really was. Could we help them support with complex investigations involving the examination of these multiple data sets better, faster, or easier? Can we do that? Not can we just bring together the trade and e-coms alerts, because that actually got you nothing. They were very often unrelated. And they also realised that if they could do that, they could understand conduct in their organisations in a much better way, because they were getting a much more holistic picture of the people in their organisations. As we did this, we spent time mapping the analyst tasks to the data as well, and we discovered a couple of themes in this, that there's obviously the forensic activity where you have an activity of concern involving a person of concern and the data sets that are relevant to that. But we also realised that the experts are performing, their kind of constant vigilance is going on, where they're really looking into data sets in a much deeper way and getting a picture of what people are doing and building patterns in their heads. And the really expert ones also know the context of that in their own organisations in the bank. So they know what's happening in other parts of the bank and deals that are happening. So they understand the context of all of this going on. So there's a number of data sets that we were putting together to see how we could bring this into the technology. We also mapped together, did hierarchical task analysis in order to understand the tasks that they were doing. And when you map it out like this, you begin to see just how many steps there are for compliance officers investigating cases. What was interesting about doing this was when we showed it back to them, they said, you've absolutely captured what we do. I've just never written it down like that. And the colour coding on here, again, we got an expert who said the white boxes is what the novices will be doing. The yellow boxes are what the kind of mid-range will be doing, and the green stuff is what only experts will do. So what you immediately see as well, that there's a lack of consistency across teams in how they go about things, simply because they haven't been doing things as long as each other. So that was a design goal, to see how could we help support that and improve consistency. And we also looked at, different processes that people followed in order to follow a certain type of investigation, like an insider trader alert. And you'll see there's a number of different stopping points. So some people would, if they found certain information, you could close it out quickly. And the goal is really to close an alert. Rather, the very best investigators are trying to catch the wrongdoers. Most people are trying to close the alerts and have a good reason to close it. And you can't blame them when they are literally doing it, hundreds of them day in, day out. So there are stopping points in all of this. But what we also realise is those lighter colour ones is where they're spending time going off to other systems to find information. And that's a barrier to going finding information, because if it's hard work to go and do it, it's easy not to do it. So again, that was a design goal, to really think about how could we support that without trying to have massive data feeds and plugins in order to do that. So what we really started to unpack from this work, and all of this is before we got any technologists involved, it's literally working with the clients, spending time interviewing them and analysing what they've said, is really understanding their pain points. So investigations are time consuming, it's hard to find the data, there's a lot of task switching going on, which of course takes time and you lose track of what you're doing. A lot of it's worked out on notepads, or it's simply carried in their heads. And you see that at the end when they're trying to write an investigatory report, that they don't have very much to kind of refer back to. And there's a lot of unsupporting problem solving because of that. There's really not a good audit trail of how they investigated. Inconsistency between analysts, as I've mentioned, and it's quite hard to train the new people coming up, because you learn it on the job as you're doing it. It's quite hard to then describe to somebody else once you've figured it out for yourself. It becomes obvious, you don't necessarily communicate it to other people. I mean, it requires experience to spot people who are doing, very smart people, doing things they shouldn't be doing. So those are the pain points we were looking to solve. And we came up with a number of cognitive assistants, you'll see a wheel, that actually we felt were important to support somebody doing this complex task. I'm not going to go into all of it, the alerting engine is the thing that most red tech has been built off. It's how do you design the rules, how do you write the rules to identify dodgy behaviour. And the rest of the work gets done manually, pulling this information together. So they're all various tools, but again designed for an analyst to use at the right moment in time on a canvas, which is a very free-form space, but with technology designed to capture the data that they're pulling together. So you can drag and drop trade information and e-coms information and news information, and it will ping to a timeline and start to build the picture for you automatically. the reporter captures your investigation as you do it, so that you have the trail of how you created the story, but also you can see it in a nice chronological time order and tell the story neatly. So these are the tools that are currently now being built at Nasdaq, and they're a very different way of doing things to the workflow-based approach. And from this, when we look at the kind of, this is a high-level user flow, what's needed in compliance, most of the activity at the moment is on finding suspicious trading activity. So we're really focusing on the review, investigate, report, and analyse, which is a feedback loop to understand better what's going on and be able to improve the tools. Now, a lot of the focus in financial services, and I'm sure everywhere, is, well, can't we just get more AI to do this? Because it's so much better than people. And, you know, there's definitely a place for it. But one of the projects, actually, I was asked to explain to 600 of the clients why AI won't work at detection, because we spent 6 weeks talking to compliance analysts alongside a model of AI-generated alerts. And what we realised was a huge part of the data set that they used to assess whether or not something is actually suspicious wasn't available to the AI algo. And if you start with the data that you think is the right data, that's where the problems come about. So the value of having that work beforehand is just, so we killed a 4-year project that could have been a great project or could never have started if we'd done the work in a different way before that. And it doesn't mean say there's a place for it. And this, you know, this mantra of don't make me think is certainly an important one in designing technology. You know, we don't want to be frustrated by technology, but there are moments in time when we should be being made to think harder, because the robots aren't the ones that end up in prison. It's always the people who have to take accountability and responsibility for this. So this unidimensional kind of line of computer automation at one end and human control at the other is very, very limited. And it can have disastrous consequences as well. There was, as Boeing knows, its own, you know, relatively recent problems where their 737, 2 of their 737s crashed with fatal consequences because somebody had put in a new system that was focused on one of 2 sensors, and they believed it couldn't fail. They felt it was impossible, so impossible to fail, they didn't tell any of the pilots it was even on the plane. So what happened was, when it failed because one of the sensors didn't work properly, it put the plane into a nosedive, and the pilots tried to pull it up more than 20 times, which of course we know from the flight recorders, and they failed to pull it up, and the planes crashed because they couldn't figure out, it wasn't in any of their manuals, what on earth was going on. They couldn't figure out where the manual override was. So actually, there's a mantra by the human-centered AI group that we should be thinking more about humans in the group and computers in the loop, than really trying to think about the human in the loop mantra. And certainly the safety 2 lot, who are looking at high-risk industries, where safety 1 is looking at where accidents happen. Safety 2 is really looking at more of the green zone of, well, actually, most of the time, things don't go wrong. And why is it they don't go wrong? And very often they don't go wrong because people are in the loop and they catch it. And in fact, there was one of those 737 flights where somebody did manage to troubleshoot and figure out what it was and override that. So it is possible to save these things. So we do need technology. I mean, when in compliance, it is like this, looking for a needle in a haystack. There is no question that we need to have technology to support us in dealing with these challenges that we have. But I think what we also need is a tool like the reporter that is going to capture this kind of complex analysis that people are doing in order to inform and make clear. So part of safety, reliability and trustworthy in technology is we can understand what's happening. So if we can understand, provide the tools so people can work in the way they do, and it captures that, then you can begin to design tools on this framework, which again, this is Ben Schneiderman's work. Instead of having that unidimensional line, of having more of a matrix where you can have high computer automation as well as high human control. And that's the obvious example of this is camera, which is a brilliant example of having incredibly high automation in it for focusing and gesture control and all that sort of thing, but actually huge amounts of human control in that, and being able to focus on the picture that you want to take, compose it, edit it after it, all of that sort of thing. So it is very much possible, and yet this isn't the way that a lot of technologies are being thought about at the moment. And a lot of that is because, as I mentioned before, it takes a huge amount of people to get involved in making great technology. A lot of the technology that's out there, once you get it to a team of this kind of size, you're a large organisation and it's very difficult to change, and you're building on top of legacy tech, and it's very difficult to come up with new ways of thinking about things. One of the reasons that LetsThink has 9 people for a startup, because we really realise it's incredibly important to have those different skill sets, or we will get it wrong from the start. But it's hard for big organisations to do that. Richard mentioned very briefly that we're also looking at music, and there's a couple of animated instruments that we've designed. But the beauty of looking in different domains and solving problems is we're thinking about how do you educate people, how do you teach people, because we're obviously thinking about engaging kids with musical instruments. And then you begin to think about, well, perhaps there's stages and levels and gamification, which then also got me thinking though, so in the workplace, there's this triangle that Nasdaq has. It talks about 70% on the job learning, 20% mentoring, 10% courses. We all know that 70% at least of what we know has come from just having a go on the job. Well, perhaps that matrix then should be also applied in organisational design. Why can we not think about compliance tools that also help to scaffold those novice compliance officers from their novice state to one of mastery with adaptations in the system? Every system at the moment is one version that's handed out as if it's the answer. And expert systems, you have to spend some time learning, but it is a process of learning, figuring it out by yourself. Surely more support could be put into that to enable you to progress in a safer, more reliable way. And that's one of the goals we have at LetsThink. And if we manage to achieve that, then maybe we can be a little bit more Tom Cruise. I don't know if anyone would have any objections to that. That really is the goal of how do we get to engaged intelligence that's really helping people think brilliantly. That's it.
We're going to start our Q&A. I wanted to ask the first question. Go ahead.
Oh, that was a really splendid talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and so much of what you've just spoken about resonates and fits. And it's like looking at a lifetime of work. My first ever paper, I kid you not, was on hierarchical task analysis. I think the biggest issue is, or one of the biggest issues in doing what you're doing is how do you avoid the trap of, despite all your best efforts, when designing technologies, building into the technology the cognitive and emotional biases of the informants from whom you extract the knowledge. That, I think, is one of the biggest challenges in this whole area. And you might not know that you've done it, as illustrated by the case of the tragic 737 accidents.
Yeah.
So nobody knew that had happened until after the fact. So how do we try and minimise that?
I think it is absolutely vitally important to spend time. I mean, so first of all, you're interviewing people across the industry. Now, the beauty of RegTech is they're not in competition with each other in terms of the clients and users. So they actually, none of them wants to be the best in class because they're probably spending too much money, they're best in class. But they all want to know that they're using the same best thing as everybody else, which means you can get together with a number of different banks or asset managers and say, look, this is how we're looking at spotting the bad guys. We need to do some cross corroboration, and you need enough of that to feel as if you're getting away from potential biases. I think you always have to be mindful of the fact that you could bake in biases. Part of making things transparent. So if we are able to visualize somebody's thought processes by tracking it and visualizing and being able to replay it and use that for training, then you can start to unpack and everyone can see, well, what did you miss and why are you always going down that route? It's not easy. It takes time to do it, and you need to go across different organizations to check out that you've got it right, or as right as you can.
A question to them. So how do you actually test whether the assistants work or not? I mean, so some of the assistants are for fund managers to, I guess, to make more money. How do you actually measure whether the assistant is doing their job? Because every situation is slightly different.
Well, I mean, certainly with the tools that we were developing in compliance, again, it's user testing, isn't it? It's you're looking for the interaction. There's lots of think aloud protocols as they're using it. Obviously, you can design. There's the detection algorithms. You can design and detect and test whether or not they are throwing up cases to see whether or not they're the right kind of cases for your clients. But every element of the tool, again, you're testing with clients to get feedback to see whether or not it's having an effect. There's a fairly rigorous, designed by Ben actually, testing program to look at the efficacy and usability and effectiveness of the technology is being designed.
I see. Oh, over here, yeah. Go ahead.
Joseph Lee from the Law Department. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk, and this also an area of red tech that I'm currently working on, in addition to other algorithm things. My first question is, and as Richard also mentioned, this software needs to be tested, and I was wondering whether would compliance officers, compliance teams be worried about using them, because whatever goes wrong, backstop at them. The regulator, the FCA or BI will go, I don't care about what software you're using, I care about your responsibility if things go wrong, you didn't report it to us. So how do the regulator, the compliance officers, they view when things happen, when things go wrong, and also the regulators, what are their attitudes towards the software such as this, especially from a compliance point of view. I think compliance is compliance, but you also have the legal team. They also need to look at the definitions of the legal requirements, and then of course things like insider dealing, it's kind of easy to understand, but there are also areas like short selling. Then that's how the computer and are there enough data to for software to understand, oh, this is actually short selling, legal short selling, and then lots of short selling that will also use derivatives. Where are we going to find data of derivative trades?
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
Starting with the regulators, I mean, the FCA is one of the world's leading innovative regulators. They run lots of tech sprints and are very supportive of technology, everything that's out there. In fact, when we were looking at the AI project, I was speaking to the chap there and he said, as far as I know, nobody's got it yet, AI for detection. And I know that because they would have come and told me about it if they had and shown it off. So I'm pretty sure nobody's done it yet. Which was good to know. So they are massively supportive of technology. The latest regulations, market abuse regulation and MiFID, the last decade has transformed technology in the industry. There's a requirement to monitor your activities. They don't say you have to have a technological solution or you can build your own if you want to. But when it gets to a certain scale, you have to have some suitable technology. So that's in legislation. They also help they had the first $1 billion fine last year, I think it was, Morgan Stanley. So they are willing to come out and charge people heftily for breaches. So they're very supportive of that. So that drives the need to have technology. They use it themselves, and there is definitely an element of, Nasdaq technology used to be called smarts, and the saying was nobody gets fired for buying smarts. There's a market leader, And if they missed it, well, everyone's using the same technology, so everyone would have missed it. So there is definitely, you know, that kind of viewpoint in that. But the compliance officers themselves, if you get them engaged in the process, you know, a lot of this work is incredibly tedious. So if you can have something that makes their day more enjoyable, and we definitely have, you know, feedback saying, you know, this is great because I can actually get, so they like understanding the market and enjoying trying to read what people are doing. They don't want to deal with clunky tech, which is what they're dealing with, and dealing with the data searching. So they're open to getting involved with technology. The budgets are there to support that. There's a massive drive from the tops of these organisations saying we should have AI and the latest cool technology because, you know, otherwise we're not out there at the front. So they get the pressure from the top saying what's the newest, latest thing. At the same time, they also know that when the SAA come in, they will absolutely, you know, you have the nice side to the innovative side of the SAA, and you have the enforcement side. The enforcement side aren't quite so friendly and fluffy. And they come in and they dig and they ask lots of questions. And they used to find, you know, people find wrongdoing. Now they find if your systems and controls aren't good enough, which is you and the people. So that's their new way of finding people, saying you should have found this thing, your controls weren't up to scratch. So there is also very much resistance to, well, yeah, of course I'll do a nice research project with you, but I'm not going to buy it until somebody else supports it, because I don't want to be that. Everyone wants to be the first fourth follower, is what we always used to say. So, you know, then as a tech developer, that's where you want to have your kind of consortium of co-developers testing it together, saying, yes, we do think this is the next thing, and we're all backing it, and we're backing it together. So that there is definitely an element of that, yeah, sounds really great. I think it will save loads of time and money. Come back when you've sold it to them. So yeah, lots in that question.
Yeah, so very interesting talk. Thank you for that. I had two specific questions. First, you said there's a problem with using AI, and because you don't get the data. Now, let's suppose Jason has a firm and I have a firm. My wrongdoings, I will use that to train the AI model, but I will not be willing to share that AI model with him. And that is, I think, one challenge which I don't know how you will solve. The other thing I wanted to ask is, like you showed some features in the beginning, like where you tell the fund managers that you are not doing these things. So a fund manager can come back and ask you, these are your ex post analysis and not ex ante, and they might be averse to your recommendations. Then how did you deal with that?
Yeah, and that's, so I'll with that one first. That's a huge challenge. And in fact, you know, the compliance, we ended up in compliance because it was a slow burn selling performance tech. One, they'll tell you, well, your data's wrong because I don't do that. And they go, well, maybe I did actually, but, you know, is he using it? Maybe I don't want to look at it. If he's not using it, I'm good, thanks. And so there is a lot of challenge. But there's a really interesting design challenge as well, because, and this is where you have to spend time understanding their day. That kind of alert was, well, we know they come in first thing, 8 o'clock in the morning, they're doing a news review, and they will all get together and talk about what's going on in the news. So you've got maybe 30 seconds to just remind them as they think about their day. So you can't design technology that you think they're going to spend all day long on it. They won't. They'll spend 5 minutes if you're lucky. And you're designing to grab their attention at the right moment in time. And it is a recommendation. And you know, you start off by showing them the complexity of their work, recognizing this is not the answer. It's something that may be additive. You may use it. So all of those challenges that are, you know, what you have to take into account when you're trying to get adoptable tech, not just tech, adoptable tech. And on the AI front, if you could even solve the fact that you've got a certain kind of model you're right about not wanting to share. Now, in the future, there's kind of a trajectory. If you can get the AI models working well, then you could get towards federated learning models where you share the model and not the data. And again, if it's a collaborative process where it's something that everyone's got the right kind of mentality behind it, it's not competitive, we want to squeeze out the bad guys, then you could get there. But we're a long way off that. There's a curve, and we're a long way away from getting to federation learning, just because the AI models themselves can't do the detection yet. So really they should focus on, well, what smaller, more focused data sets could they generate, proxies that we haven't got that they're not using. We do that instead and just provide it as a data feed that could be an extra piece of information in that incomplete picture they're looking at.
Thank you.
You made a good comment at the end with the data. So is data synthesis and artificial data, would it be accepted by the companies? You know, if you tell them, I developed this and I use artificial or synthetic data, will they have trust in your system? I mean, if the basis of training was...
Yeah, so no, they're always going to want to test it on real data.
But if there is no real data, that would be a deal breaker for a particular software. What is the next best thing you can do apart from waiting, you know, until you have more data?
Yeah, and there are companies. So there's there's lots and lots of startups in the ecosystem trying to solve these problems. One of which is a synthetic data company that came out of one of the FCA tech sprints where they wanted to have synthetic data for people to kind of rapidly develop prototypes for. That company has actually spun out saying, okay, actually we can take old historic market data, we can create synthetic data, we can inject events into it, and we can see whether or not people can detect those events, that sort of thing. So those companies are existing, as is another one that's just been set up to be the sandpit, because actually getting into these organizations and being able to get behind into their tech stack and a UAT environment to test out these things is also incredibly difficult and time consuming. So again, they've developed a sandpit that enables both, you know, potential buyer and vendor to come together and test out the tech. And the companies might be willing to put data into that to test on if it's old data. So there's multiple problems as you're recognizing, and gradually the ecosystem is building up to help provide solutions.
Any other questions? Yeah. Go ahead, Mayur.
I had a question and a comment. Start with the comment. So very, very interesting, intriguing talk, and I saw a lot of academic insights in your talk, even though it's a practitioner version of the talk, but I saw a lot of academic literature speaking at the back of my head. So one thing is, for example, when you speak about the information we provided, it should allow to play. So you are trying to say keep the exploration elements alive, and it's a different view of looking at rationality. For example, when you think of we have a problem when we want to solve with different means versus you want to provide them information where they can solve different kind of problems altogether, right? So it's a different way of looking at technology. So I see there is a lot of academic contribution you are making to what you are building in terms of technology. So that was just a comment. But then my question was when these tools are open to different organizations, right? And partly building on what Asim was asking is the users, for example, the fund managers, they might have their own worldview, right? And sometimes your recommendations versus what they are thinking wouldn't match. And do you observe this kind of situations, and do you address those after, for example, say selling a software to a bank or a fund management organization? Do you also step back to see what they do with the technology and how they use it, and when they use the recommendations and they don't, and those kind of things, do you observe those things?
Yeah, so first, on the first comment, thank you. It's built on lots of academics like William Wong, who's done amazing work on interactive user bases and the importance of the ability to play. And the software is very much trying to look at the tasks that people are doing and make them easier. So we're never going to be saying to a fund manager, you shouldn't have invested in that stock because of X, Y, and Z. That's absolutely their role. In fact, so my master's study was designed a trading game and stuck heart rate monitors on them and got them to kind of reappraise or distract themselves while we put them into profit and loss and measure that. And I managed to show them that they're all biased, and it was, you know, a brilliant piece of research in my view. And they went, oh, that's fascinating, Wendy. So what should we do about it? It's like, you're managing how many billions of pensions, you're asking me what to do about it. But very quickly you realise they're not asking, you know, about my view on the geopolitical situation. They're asking about how they think, you know, how can we reveal that to them in a productive way and give them feedback in a way that they can improve their own mastery. That whole, how does somebody use the technology to become a better master of their skill, of their activity? Yes, absolutely. You have to kind of follow up on how people are using this and find out. And I think there are a group of people who will say, well, they're not using that brilliant new feature that I remember one presentation. They're not using this feature that's a black button and a black box. It's like, I can't see it. But there's a kind of group of people who go, well, they're not using it, they must be stupid. They haven't figured it out yet, or actually it's bad design. And my view is very much, look, people aren't stupid, and the design has not nailed the way they're working, the time in which they want to use it, and the best way to use it, and that we need to keep going back and understanding. And of course, they will come up with new ways of using it as well. And lots of our ideas were, I mean, we had a replay mechanism for the case builder, which is, being able to pull together pieces of information, capture the way somebody did it. And we put in the replay button the last 5 things that were added, just because we know people get interrupted by emails all the time. We thought, well, that will help people be less distracted. And we showed that to them and said, that's brilliant for training, because you see how they did it. Wow, of course, we've attended that for training purposes. But, you have to keep interacting with the people you're designing for, because they are the most important people in the loop.
Thank you.
So would you actually say that user interface design is more important than the information that's being shown?
I totally would, because that's the bit I love the most. But I've also learned very much, I mean, that's the thing, you have this layer at the top, and then having worked with, the full stack developers and the data scientists underneath it, if you haven't got that bit right, and, the amount of work that needs to go into understanding the database and the uses in order to design that to deliver information in a performant manner, that's enormous. So I can draw pretty pictures all day long. Somebody's got to make it work. So no, everyone's as valuable as each other.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? If not, we're leaving it here. And thank you once again, Wendy, for this exciting talk. Final remarks. So as I mentioned before, we have the room until 2:45, so stick around, actually have some food, and talk to Wendy and Claire and all the other participants here. They will be here until 2:45. Also, check out the other Digital Futures events we have ongoing, and also the Digital Trust and Security Guest Seminar Series. There will be further talks coming as part of that seminar series. But hopefully, you've set the bar high, so hopefully you won't be disappointed too much with all the other seminars. Thank you once again, Wendy.